Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Hey guys, Merry Christmas. Let's go ahead and work on through our 12 days of nutrients here. And today I want to talk about copper. I had a conversation with one of my friends and he was sharing with me that he talked to 2 or 3 people. And this week I've talked to 2 or 3 people and they've all said the same thing. Well, they've said some variation of the same thing. They're saying that our people that we use, they don't test for micronutrients. They say those tests are not very effective. And I would agree with you. If you're using a Malic 3 test, I would 100% agree. They're not very effective. We got other people saying another variation, which is we test for them. We don't know what to do with them. We get back our recommendations and the recommendations for NPK, maybe some sulfur. That's it. They test for them. We don't know what to do with them. 2 reasons for that. One, it's a Malic 3, and therefore the correlation between the test and what you're going to get when you apply something is not very consistent. So they're not doing it. Or flat out, there's a lot of people in the world that just flat don't know what to do with micronutrients. We get some other people saying, hey, we've tried it, but we couldn't get the consistent results. See the earlier comments. I think that's the deal. Guys, this is 2025. Okay, this isn't your grandpa's soil test from 1958. And when we're doing this and we're using Midwest Labs and we're using the extraction methods that they want us to use, we are getting results. We trust their extraction methods. We trust the recommendations that the computer sends out. And guys, I'm going to talk about why this little bitty micronutrient, copper, is probably needed in about the least amounts of any of the micros. And as a matter of fact, as I look at my table of ratings here, table 164 out of Midwest Labs, of all of the micronutrients on here, it is that and boron are actually needed in the lowest amounts. And yet they're hugely important. I'm going to talk about what that does for us and why we want to pay attention. Wheat growers, listen up. There is something in here for you. Canola growers, pay attention. Everybody out here, guys, there's stuff in here for you. And if you're one of the people who's been testing and either testing for micros and saying, hey, man, we don't know what to do with this, or using something and saying, we're not getting a result because we put out a multi-pack. It had copper, zinc, boron. It cured cancer, fixed hangnails, and stop the flu. No, multi-packs don't work, okay? We've got to put on exactly what we need, when we need it, where we need it. And if we do that, the results are going to be fantastic. So I just want to touch on that because, guys, we've got people still pulling soil tests. It hasn't froze that hard. Now here at home, we're going to be in the 60s next week in southern Iowa. There's a lot of soil testing yet to be done. First thing I want to do is grab our rolls of the essential nutrients and let's see what they have to say about copper. Catalyzes several plant processes. It has a major function in photosynthesis. It has a major function in reproduction. It has an indirect role in chlorophyll production. It increases sugar, and we know, guys, sugar is huge. Trivia question, bushel of soybeans, how many pounds of sugar we got to make? The answer, 300. So 100 bushel beans take 30,000 pounds of sugar. Bushel of corn, how much sugar we got to make? 100 pounds. 300 bushel corn takes 30,000 pounds of sugar. We are sugar factories. That's our goal. Copper will also intensify color. We know it improves the flavor of the fruits and the vegetables, and we know that it is a key component of plant health. Starting in the Midwest Labs handbook here today, they're talking about all micronutrients, but I want to reiterate this, please. Crop acres are frequently found deficient in one or more of the micronutrients: boron, copper, manganese, iron, zinc, and moly. In many situations, a deficiency of certain micronutrients is the factor responsible for ineffective utilization of the major and secondary nutrients supplied. Let me say that again for the people in the back who weren't listening. A deficiency of micronutrients is the factor responsible for ineffective utilization of the major and secondary nutrients supplied in the programs. Guys, when we don't have the micronutrients right, it is a known fact. The N, the P, the K, the sulfur, the magnesium, none of those work right. None of those work right if we don't have these other micros in there. They go on to say, although only required in small amounts by the plants, their deficiency can have just as much effect on crop production as any of the major elements. And we do know that high phos levels, high nitrogen levels induce micronutrient deficiencies. I love that book, guys. I want to encourage you to download this. You can get it for free. You can buy it for $10 if you want the OG from them. There's a lot of things in there that are good, solid fundamentals that everybody should be aware of. Another book I highly recommend that you get is this fertilizer handbook. It's not in print anymore, so you and I are going to be competing. We're going to be going on Amazon and typing it in and saying, is it available? Because from time to time, they come up and we try to buy them. It's the fertilizer handbook put out by the Fertilizer Institute. It's out of publication. Talking about all micronutrients in general, synthetic chelates are generally about 3 to 5 times effective as in organic sources. 3 to 5 times as effective. You can take the long road. You can broadcast copper sulfate. You can put out magnesium sulfate. There's a lot of things that you can do, but when we start looking at these complexes that are organic, it's not near as effective as the synthetics, and we want to make sure that we're doing this correctly. That's why we use the EDTA chelated copper. Going into the Western Fertilizer Handbook, just because they talk to us about what it does and what it looks like when it's not right. Copper is an activator of other elements within the plant. So if you don't want your other elements to work, copper is no big deal. But if you want your other elements to work, copper is probably your first choice. It seems to promote a formation of vitamin A and appears to have a regulating function when soil nitrogen is too high, plain and simple. So what does it look like? The plants that are short in it will have a bleached appearance looking chlorotic. In citrus growing areas, dieback of new growth is often associated with a deficiency in copper. And citrus fruit from copper deficient trees is marked irregularly with reddish brown markings, and the juice is low in acid. Guys, this is a big micronutrient. It's a little micronutrient, but it's a big one. Neil has a ton to say about it, and I love reading about this in here as I've went through this book over and over and over again in hands-on agronomy, and he starts talking about the different things that he has studied, that he has observed, and he has spent years in the fields. And I think that's the most important thing is the person you're working with. Well, my guy, he's got 20 years experience. Does he have 20 years experience, or has he done the exact same thing 20 years in a row? Those are not the same, okay? I spent 10 years in the seed corn industry. I did everything from working in the lab, testing how do we breed plants to get better kernel sizes, what row pattern produces the best kernel sizes, produces the most yield. We've done all kinds of things. We ran over 1,000 test plots, comparing products, comparing systems, comparing this to that. And when you run those, you get some definite opinions. But we didn't do the same thing. We've never done the same thing. We are always looking. We're always reading. We're always studying. There's so much information out there. And that's who we need to be looking for. I hope whoever you're working with, that's their deal. This is a little involved because this is going to be a typical deal where several of the micronutrients get tied together, okay, of all the nutrients. Anytime there's a shortage of potassium, manganese, or copper, a weak stock will be observed. High potassium ties up manganese. High nitrogen ties up copper. High calcium ties up potassium. We don't want to overuse anything. There is no one single nutrient fix, guys. It isn't just pour this nutrient to it. It's doing everything the correct way. Each and all of these cause a weak stock, but calcium is the culprit if everything else is available in adequate amounts and a high calcium level prevails. It does not take a great flush of nitrogen to get excellent yield. My approach to high calcium is simple in the extreme. I start backing calcium down until everything else is there in equilibrium. High calcium doesn't have to be a detriment, but it almost always is because it allows the tie-up of other nutrients. Guys, there's no one nutrient fix. I've seen companies come through and this year, 2 years, 3 years, man, it's calcium. Oh, you just calcium. Buy our calcium, do the calcium, do the calcium. That's the one thing. Now they're talking about something completely different. Here's the thing that I learned from Jim Rohn. Anybody who has a new fundamental, Jim Rohn says that you should be very suspicious of because there aren't any new fundamentals. There are new bright ideas, not to be confused with fundamentals. And fundamentally, getting all of the micronutrients, all of the secondaries, and all of the majors, the macros, in sync is a fundamental. And that's how we're going to make everything else work. That's how we're going to prevent disease. That's how we're going to promote good soil health. That's how we're going to promote soil bacteria. That's how we're going to build carbon. That's how we're going to build yield. That's how we're going to better utilize our water. It's how we're going to have better soil structure. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a fundamental. And that ain't Rod talking. That's years and years of guys like Albrecht, like Neil Kinsey, like Donald Schriefer, like Ray Rawson, like just so many friends that we have in this deal. The people that we've got to hang out and work with and study with is just amazing. And I would encourage you to be finding those people and getting them on your team, the ones that you love to hang out with, but the ones that are bringing you great value and are making things happen. Another friend of mine that I just love spending time with and I've learned so much from is Bill Durrington. And guys, those are names to me who are guys who are giants in the industry. People who have, not because they were getting preached to sell something by some company. These were the guys who brought us information, who worked and studied and said, look at this, here's what you can learn, here's what you can do. Moving on into the book here with Neil. But consider what happens if nitrogen is overapplied. First of all, too much nitrogen can induce a zinc deficiency. Zinc is instrumental in moisture absorption, and therefore it takes more water to do the same job. When we use too much nitrogen, we have a zinc deficiency. When we have a zinc deficiency, we have very poor utilization of water. Also, excessive amounts of nitrogen tie up copper. Copper is what confers stock strength to the plant. That is why the field that gets nitrogen in the proper amount will exhibit quite a different scene from the one that gets too much nitrogen. In the last case, you can actually cut the stalk at tassel near the ground and see the inside starting to disintegrate. By the time this plant is matured, there will be hardly anything left in the bottom of the stalk. Guys, that is not what we are after. We don't want that stalk disintegrating at tassel time. That's why they fall over. That's why you have to buy a corn reel. That's why they don't yield very good. That is not what we are interested in. Too much nitrogen, not enough zinc, not enough copper. Following, just after manganese on our test, is the reported copper level. When it comes right down to it, information on whether or not a farmer should be trying to increase the copper levels in the soils can be very confusing. For example, one Midwestern University Extension publication reads, the amount of copper available for the plant is not adequately known since a reliable soil test for copper does not exist. Wrong answer, Bob. The author does go on to recommend how much copper to use on particular crops anyway. Even though he doesn't understand the test, he knows what you need. These people are dangerous. When it comes to micronutrient use, much of the same thing is still going on today. Copper is a micronutrient needed in small amounts when compared to NPK, sulfur, or lime. And all of these nutrients are needed in adequate amounts before trying to increase production capabilities with the trace elements such as copper. Severe copper deficiencies are most common on soils such as peat or muck, or those unusually high in organic matter. Very sandy soils are also more likely to be copper deficient. But a very slight deficiency or hidden hunger, these things are prevalent for some high-yielding crops, even on good mineralized soils. Some problems can occur due to heavy application of nitrogen or high amounts of phosphorus in the soil. Either of these will reduce copper availability. High soil pH levels, those above 7, and drought conditions can intensify copper problems. You boys out there farming in those high pH soils, this is one of those products that you really need to foliar feed. You put it in the soil, the pH, the organic matter, the CEC tends to rip the chelators apart. Also, excessive zinc levels in the soil can lead to serious copper deficiencies. Guys, it's all about the balance. When neglected, copper can become the limiting factor in yield, especially in small grains, and particularly in wheat. Here we go, wheat growers, this is for you. When neglected, copper can become the limiting factor in yield, especially in small grains and particularly wheat. But it will also limit cotton, grasses, fruit trees, and certain vegetables, especially such as onions, spinach, and any members of the cabbage family. Copper is essential to chlorophyll formation in plants. It is important in the reproductive stage of development, meaning better seed production. Copper helps increase sugar content. It contributes to both better flavor and better color. It helps increase storage and shipping qualities. The copper will increase the stalk strength in combination with adequate potassium and manganese. If we want good stalk strength, we got to have the right amount of manganese. We got to have the right amount of copper. We got to have the right amount of potassium. And we are painfully aware that too much nitrogen makes it hard to get those other nutrients into that plant. And in this regard, adequate copper seems to increase the uptake efficiency of plants receiving ammonium forms of N. Having the right amount of copper actually makes the ammonium N go into the plant better. Hey, there's your friend. Now you're still getting by on less nitrogen. Do the right thing don't overuse nitrogen, use copper, and you can actually use less nitrogen. Gee, that seems like a winner to me for whatever my 2 cents is worth. It is also important to use copper because it is important in the production of amino acids in the late stage of growth. And guys, copper is involved in the building and the converting of amino acids to protein. There are people out here selling you amino acids, and I think some of them work. I'm not here to rail on amino acids. I am not. But I do think that there's a very specific way they should be used. I think there are certain things that are going to exacerbate a need for an amino acid. But fundamentals are still fundamentals, and fundamentals say, let's get the copper right, and let's make all the amino acids that we can, and let's convert those amino acids into protein. For you guys growing the small grains up north especially, and you're trying to lay the nitrogen to it, and you're making your crop fall over, and you can't get the protein levels that you want, might I suggest that we get very serious about checking our sulfur and using the right amount, and about checking our copper and using the right amount so we can get all the protein out of that plant we can. Copper chelate is an effective foliar source. However, we do need to be aware that as we foliar feed, that it's the only present crop, and there will be no significant effect on measurable copper levels for the crops grown in the future. But when applied consistently over the years, it is possible to build those levels up. Guys, the bottom line is this: more effective residue, more well-balanced residue recycles and leads to a better balanced soil. The critical ranges, according to Neil here, anything below 2 is deficient, 5 is excellent, and 10 would not be considered excessive. Because this is one of the big, oh man, copper's toxic, you don't want to use that. Guys, water is toxic. I'm drinking quite a bit of it here. But you can kill yourself by drinking too much water. That was done once. I'm not going to share the story with you, but if you're interested, reach out to Karen with a text. I'll call you and I'll tell you about it. But it was 641-919-5570. That's how you can get a hold of Karen. But there is some documented cases of people literally dying from drinking too much water. Don't let the people scare you out of using boron and copper because they don't know what to do with it. If you need this, it's important. Let me give you those levels again. Anything below 2 parts per million, you're deficient. 5 is excellent, but 10 is not excessive. We want to make sure that we're keeping this where it needs to be. When it comes to copper, remember what happens when you put on extra nitrogen. Too much nitrogen stops the uptake, and the overuse of nitrogen can mean a copper deficiency on soils that appear to have all they need. Now we're back to tissue testing. So your soil test checked out fine, but we used too much in, and now what have we got to do? Now we've got to foliar feed some copper in there because we created our own problem. When crops on soils with adequate fertility that test low in copper fail to respond to copper applications, then a molybdenum test should be considered. Both are needed to be present in adequate amounts since either one can influence the amount of that crop can take up of the other. So moly and copper are very closely related. Another thing that we need to be checking for and watching, and we're going to talk about on another day. So, this guy is talking about some corn that fell over. We went through all the data until he hit 2 parts per million. In each case, he lost corn from lodging, but the lower the copper level below 2 parts per million, the worse the corn was lodged. Copper gives resilience to a plant. The other key to flavor after sulfur is copper. Copper doesn't move in the soil. If you see a copper deficiency at all, it is like sulfur. It shows the deficiency in the youngest growth first. Adequate nitrogen means you get better copper uptake. Too much nitrogen means you actually decrease the availability of copper to the plant. Wheat growers. Wheat is a crop that responds well to copper. If the other needed nutrients are adequate, but you are below 2 parts per million in copper, you put enough copper on your wheat to get above that, it will produce an extra 5 bushels of wheat. Guys, this is a huge micronutrient for you financially. Very small amounts are needed. It's easy to foliar feed or row place in the right circumstances. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right things. When I talked about those tissue tests earlier, I ran across something here as I was reading earlier today. I want to talk about how to take that tissue test. We want to go out with a tissue test, and we would very much like to, If it's a small plant, cut it off with scissors at the top of the ground. Why? Because when I pull that plant and it pops out of the ground, what happens? Dirt splatters up on there. And then I'd like to go to town. Don't use your sink water. Don't use your well water. Don't use your irrigation water because those have minerals in them. Fake readings. What do we want? Go to town, spend the 89 cents for a gallon of distilled water and rinse your leaves off with the distilled water so we get the clean specimen. And he says, first, be sure to select clean specimens to send in for analysis. If that is not possible, lightly rinse the plants off of the leaves using distilled water. Water from a well or tap has nutrients in it that will affect the analysis. It does not require much soil residue to throw the analysis off. Soil splashed on the plants from rainfall or overhead irrigation or dusty conditions that cause it to settle on the leaves are good examples. If you fail to send clean plants, it is usually easy to recognize on the test because the iron, aluminum, and manganese will be extremely elevated, making it appear that they are all seriously high or toxic. Think about this. Think about the guy that rips the leaves off on the east side of a gravel road where the prevailing winds are from the west. Do you think he's getting a fake calcium reading if he doesn't rinse those? I'd say probably yes. Next, use a clean bag to place the leaves or the plant tissue inside. Paper bags are best. They're not best. They're the only thing that I would ever use. I sent stuff in a baggie one time, and it took 3 days to get there, and I had silage by the time it got to the Midwest office. The plant parts sample and send in for analysis will depend upon the growth stages, and we can go through that with you at a later date. Just know that there's when it's a V3 plant, we take it all. If it's a corn plant that's tasseling, we take the leaf opposite and below the ear shoot. So there's a lot of ways to do that, and you can get that out of Midwest. Midwest has publications that will show you what you need to do there. Last thing coming out of here, copper tends to release slowly and remain available, but good microbial activity in the aerobic zone helps provide more even distribution. Without further information, the expense of building copper in the subsoil may not be cost effective because of the lack of microorganisms. So what do we want? We want to have adequate copper in that top part. And if we don't have adequate copper for us, the answer is to foliar feed or row place EDTA calcium or EDTA copper and get you rocking and rolling and get that yield. Let's leave that residue behind. Let's leave a good quality residue behind, and let's get those fields headed in the right direction. Out of Schrieffert's book here, copper has been almost totally ignored in general agriculture, yet it plays an extremely important role during the plant's reproductive stage and in photosynthesis. In the past, copper served as a fungicide. Now, I know that all the people selling fungicides says it has no value as a fungicide. And I'm not here saying just use copper. I am here saying if you have a healthy plant, you have a healthier plant. That's just reality, okay? And I would say this. I encourage you to take a look at the fungicide labels and see how many of those fungicide labels have copper in them. And then I would say, wonder why that is. He has set the level for standard between 2 and 3. He believes that 2 is a minimum and should be working towards 3. So these guys are in agreement on what is low. Anything below 2 is a problem. They're trying to get to 3. Neil's trying to get to 5. I probably would tend to agree with Neil, especially as we live in this day of higher yields. You know, we're back in 85. It's a little different than what we need now. We're pulling off a lot bigger yields. Coming out of life and energy, copper is the key to elasticity in the plant as well as mold control. If you're fighting mold in your soybeans, do I think this is the only answer? No. Do I think being deficient in copper exacerbates that problem? Oh, yeah. I believe that there's a lot of things that we can do to help ourselves, and we do not want to be deficient in copper on any crop. If you have a rust spot on your car that has come through from underneath, does it correct the rust spot to just say, hey, there's a paint deficiency, and then apply paint over the rust? Because that's what a lot of us have been doing in regards to micros and secondaries, especially micros. We try to mask it with too much N, too much P, too much K, maybe too much calcium. Guys, that's not the answer. Midwest Labs, table of ratings, holding it right here. This lives on my desk. It never gets put away. Copper levels, medium, 0.9 to 1.2. Guys, I believe that those guys there are correct. I believe that you want to have a minimum of 2 parts per million. And other than that, you're low. And I believe very strongly that pulling that soil test and getting that recommendation back is your single best friend. I love what we do. I love bringing information to growers. Guys, whether you work with us or not, we're excited to have you watch. We're excited to have you going and asking questions of other suppliers and saying, hey, what about this? What about this? And just know this, we finished up, I've driven about 3,000 miles here in the month of December. I've been to, I think, 5 different of our fundamentals of agronomy. We've been in Columbus, Ohio. We've been in, I don't even know where all, South Dakota. We were in Nebraska. I was in Bettendorf. There's just a ton of these that have been going on. And right after the first year, we're going to take off and do it all again and go to other locations. If you'd like to go reach out, let us know. We'd love to get with you. If you'd like more information on copper, we'd be happy to share that with you. If you'd like to hear the story on how someone overdosed on water, we'd just love to share that with you. Reach out, Karen, 641-919-5570. And I hope you're taking this time to think about what you're going to do in 26. What are you going to do to make more money? What are you going to do to better take care of your family? That's what this is all about. Thank you for tuning in. And we just want to tell you guys, we really do hope you have a very blessed holiday season.